All right, so I am jumping on the bandwagon here, talking about going bear mode. This was popularized a couple of years ago by Alex from Alpha Destiny. It was recently touched on by Jeff Nippard, who did an experiment after he was influenced by Alex. And then OmarIsuf made another video giving his little different perspective there. So I wanted to touch on it, one, just because I think it's an interesting topic and it's being talked about now, and two, just because I think I have a different perspective. One of the reasons being is that I'm 6'1", whereas Alex and Jeff are both 5'5", and so that makes a very big difference in my opinion when it comes to how different body fats are perceived. So you have to consider that when you're 5'5", obviously everything's going to be kind of stacked together. And usually people who have been lifting for 5+ years at that height, it's very unlikely that they're ever going to be considered too skinny. At that height, everything is, like I said, is pretty stacked. And so a lot of times I'll see somebody at that height who might be at a little bit higher body fat percentage. And you just think, man, if they really got lean, like they would just look fantastic, because I don't know if I've really ever seen anybody who's taken this seriously and looked too skinny at that height. Whereas when you are 6 foot or more, it's very easy to look too skinny. And, I didn't really even look that much like I lifted until I was probably at least 5 years into it. When I was in college, I was probably about 170 pounds or so. And at some point I just decided to go for it and just really bulk up. And I put on close to 30 pounds in a year. And as crazy as that was, and as, I probably put on at least half fat, I only got compliments throughout that entire time from guys, from girls, people just saying I looked bigger. I just looked like just a stronger individual, but nobody ever thought I looked fat. And that's just because it's hard to look fat unless you're really high in body fat when you're taller. A friend of mine who's 6'3", he did something like that recently. He bulked up to close to 230 pounds. And again, he really only got compliments, even though for him and for myself, when we did these bigger bulks, we, with our shirts off, we looked considerably worse. At the same time, almost everybody who saw us with our clothes on. And so we just looked a lot better. And by better, I mean bigger, more muscular, like we lifted. So obviously there are some people who just prefer the leaner aesthetic look. And I think that's great. I think if you are going to be shirtless a lot of the time, if you're going to the beach, that totally makes sense. But for most of us, we generally have our clothes on, and most people see us like that. And so it just depends on what you like. I wouldn't really recommend doing something just to appeal to other people. But I will say that anytime I have bulked up and gotten heavier, the heaviest I've ever really gotten was around 220 pounds. The heavier I got, the more compliments I received, the more people said I looked big and that I really looked like I was getting results in the gym. Anytime I cut down, unfortunately, you kind of see the opposite. And so if you're really short, generally speaking, you're just going to look better the leaner you get. You see those pictures of Jeff Nippard when he was really dieted down. He looks fantastic. I don't think anybody would ever say that this guy looks too skinny or that he doesn't lift. But if you get somebody who's taller who gets really lean, it's very easy to look like you don't lift that much. And so that is one of the biggest benefits I see for somebody who is taller doing this sort of bear mode thing, is just that you will most of the time look like a bigger individual. You will have that more powerful appearance. And if you've been doing this for 10+ years, it can be kind of disheartening to look like you don't lift when you get really lean. I know people like Eric Helms says the same thing. He's doing a contest soon, and I think he's also around 6 feet tall. He's going to be cutting down into the maybe like upper 170s. And with clothes, he's probably not going to look like he's that big. But obviously, he's been lifting for a very long time, and he bulks up to about 220 as well and looks like a very big individual at that weight. Kind of touching with that, you have pictures versus reality. And almost everybody is going to look better the leaner they are in pictures. I see people all the time who they cut down from a higher body fat and to get really lean. And in person, they might look like I said before, they might look like they haven't really lifted as much. But in pictures, they look amazing. And, I often wonder that when I see some of these transformation pictures as a man, like you look really good, but what do you look like in person? How much muscle did you actually lose? Because if you take somebody, let's say somebody is 200 pounds, 20% body fat, and they lose 15 pounds of fat and 10 pounds of muscle. Most of us would not be happy with that at all, losing that much muscle. But their body fat percentage would still go down with that result. And so they would probably look better in pictures, because it's really hard to capture in-person size in pictures. You tend to notice more the leanness, the shapes of muscles, and things like that. And so that's why you can have somebody who's 140 pounds but looks amazing in pictures, and they could look way better in pictures than somebody who has 40 pounds more muscle than them, but just isn't really, proportional, doesn't have the symmetry, doesn't have the full muscle bellies, things like that. And so again, do you want to look good in pictures or do you want to look good in person? That might be something to consider when you're deciding if you want to go onto one of these bigger bulks. Now, one of the other things that they talk about is focusing on specific muscles for this bear mode. So that would be like the neck, the traps, upper back, things like that. To me, I don't really think it's that critical to focus on specific body parts like that, only in the sense that I think you should always be focusing on that, whether you're cutting or you're bulking up, you should always want to develop the entire body. I would say always train your traps, always train your upper back, things like that. So it's not that those aren't important. I do agree that those muscle groups are important to have that look. But for the most part, you should always be training them anyway. And generally speaking, your muscle groups are going to grow proportionate to how they've always been. You rarely see somebody who had amazing arms and then all of a sudden they became disproportionately poor arms, or somebody who had poor legs and all of a sudden they became amazing legs. The body tends to grow proportionally, and you can certainly bring up some weak points. So if you want more of that powerful look, train the neck, train the traps, things like that. But that isn't something that I would say is exclusive to this bear mode thing. I would say just train that in general. Now, one thing I thought was interesting is they had talked about these studies where one group had bulked up really fast, the other group had bulked up much slower. They still put on the same amount of muscle in the slow group, but they didn't put on nearly as much fat. And so I think you're talking about two different issues here. So one is talking about how fast you are bulking up. The other one, what I would consider this bear mode bulked up look, is just what body fat you are at. So you could still do a higher body fat bulk. You could still go into this bear mode and just do it slowly. There's nobody saying that you have to do this dirty bulk and gain a pound every single week until you're way overweight. So I would say follow both principles. If you want to be at a higher body fat, that's fine. Just don't rush there. Go ahead and gain maybe 1 pound a month, maybe 2 pounds a month, still focus on the strength, all those same principles, but just do it in an intelligent way. And eventually, the more weight you gain, the higher your body fat will inevitably get. And then you can decide if you want to stay at that higher body fat or not. So again, for me, I really like to sit around closer to 15% body fat. The leanest I've ever gotten, maybe 7-8% body fat. And it's cool in pictures, the pump looks amazing, but it doesn't feel great. Certainly libido goes down, cravings go up like crazy. I just feel sluggish. And, if I start getting maybe closer to 20+% body fat, then I really just don't like how I look. Again, you can actually get sluggish from too high a body fat as well. So for me personally, I like around 15%. And at my height, nobody is ever going to think that 15% looks chubby or anything like that. So if it's something that you want to try, I would say give it a shot. And also, when you look at people who have very well-developed builds, it's very rare that you have somebody who has never done that. Even the people who are against it now have still had that phase, okay? All the 3DMJ guys, right? They all say, do a slower bulk, take it slow, stay leaner, closer to contest condition. But all of them at one point have bulked up to higher body fats. OmarIsuf says the same thing. He says, stay leaner. He doesn't think it's worth it to bulk up, but he himself has been above, I think, 220. And so that's just a trend that I've personally noticed is most of the people who have gotten really big have at one point done this kind of, not necessarily a dirty bulk, but they've gotten much higher in body fat. It's rare that you see somebody who's really, unless they have like great genetics, it's rare you see somebody who has really put on all the muscle they can, who's really gotten very impressive, who's just never bulked up. It's usually the case that they, in their earlier years, when they can put on more muscle from that higher caloric surplus, that they do that bulk. And then later they kind of bring it back. And I've done that myself. Like I said, I don't plan on getting up to like 220, 230 anymore. But at one point I did that. Now I like to stay closer to that 12 to 15% body fat range. But again, it just depends on what your preferences is. So that is what I think the benefits of bear mode are. I think it's nice to be able to kind of be a little bit more lax in your nutrition. I think it's nice to be able to just feel more comfortable as far as your energy and everything like that. You're stronger in the gym, which is great, and you do appear bigger to other people. But if you are maybe on the shorter side and you don't want that kind of stumpier look, I could see why somebody would want to stay leaner most of the time. And really, there's no harm in trying it and seeing how you do. If you don't like it, you're maybe a couple weeks away from just dieting down and looking leaner again.